In theory, educated Asian learners who know more than 20 or 30,000 English words with advanced grammar skills should have absolutely no reason to struggle in terms of displaying very basic communication performance. Nowadays, direct target language use and spoken interaction is easily delivered through online chat applications that connect the native speakers and learners around the world. Then why do the majority of Asian learners' English language proficiency still remain as elusive as ever, despite all the sophisticated theories, renowned teaching or learning materials, and books developed by native speaking scholars, and the easy accessibility of technology nowadays? What more could possibly be done? The lack of functional use of English language among Asian learners, including those who have completed a high level of education, reflects failure to cope with the intricate nature of the second language learning process and the lack of adequate instruction. The intricate nature of the second language learning process requires meticulous instruction aligned with learners' unique challenges. The primary aim for second language acquisition is to develop learners' creativity and resolve the obscurities. Educators haven't been able to make it easy to identify and connect the fundamental concepts of English for learners in great numbers in the first place. In order for learners to connect the fundamental concepts of English, learners need the additional process that relates their existing cognitive structure to English. A learner's native language unlocks the mystery, and the forms of English language provide the bedrock of creativity. They need a clear awareness of the non existent concepts within their native language in relation to the English language. The widely accepted misconceptions and collective unawareness have shaped the long standing language educational practices that undermine the effort of moving ahead and optimizing the model. Due to the current pandemic, especially educators have no choice but to grapple with distance learning or alternative teaching approaches. This generation has a lot on their plate to make the most effective use of technology and produce adequate online or distance learning materials. In this presentation, I'm going to materialize the challenges you may have never been able to see before by looking through the eyes of Asian learners. My purpose is to change the narrative around second language education and raise public awareness. But more importantly, I like to share the missing piece of the language learning process, encapsulated as a practical and concrete model: learning algorithms. One of the learning algorithm designs that I invented is the breakthrough sentence converting algorithm that enables learners to create one English sentence into a minimum of 118 sentences. Let me make it clear that machine learning is not a replacement for in-person lectures on the web. Most of all, the goal of machine learning is to find the best possible models, learning algorithm. Besides machine learning, let me set the record straight first about the misconceptions in regards to the second language acquisition process. Myth number 1. It is best to learn English naturally. There's no such thing as learning a language naturally, whether it's the first or second. The essence of language is not limitation, but creativity. One study shows at as young as 4 years of age, native speaking children apply rules for the formation of plural, present progressive, past tense, third singular, and possessives. In the course of my 2 decades of professional experience, I'm greatly alarmed that the most basic English ground rules in and of themselves are invariably absent amongst all Asian learners which raises a major issue in second language education. Myth number 2. Direct target language use and spoken interaction are the most ideal way to learn. Prematurely employing direct target language use and spoken interaction perpetuates the popular notion that students can naturally learn without special instruction, while disregarding the values of the forms. Although this well-intended approach may encourage learners to be more willing to display language production, most learners often find such classroom style infantilizing. This method of learning ignores the fundamental principles of language learning. For instance, the length of residing in the English-speaking countries does not correlate with English language proficiency among diverse adult learners. I cannot agree more with scholars who strongly warn that communicative intention alone certainly doesn't accomplish English language proficiency. Spontaneous communication is far too often misunderstood with surface imitation, by blindly and haphazardly memorizing sounds of individual English words, stock phrases, idioms, phrasal verbs, and sentences from English podcasts, TV shows, and dramas. Surface imitation neither resolves the obscurities nor develops creativity. It's the educator's duty to lay the foundation that resolves the phonetic, grammatical, and semantic obscurities for learners around the world. Myth number 3. A learner's native language is the biggest barrier. When it comes to acquiring English language proficiency, for Asian learners, English is a language that has many over-differentiated concepts and their unidentifiable meanings compared to their native languages. Given the similar structures of phonology, grammar, and word arrangements, European language speakers outperform Asian learners. In contrast to European language speakers, Asian learners are extremely vulnerable to subtleties of specific sounds, sentence structures, and patterns of word arrangements and their meanings, due to the direct influence of their native language. However, a learner's native language is considered taboo, and educators and learners around the world shun their native language. They are fiercely fixated on the target language itself, while overlooking the most basic English ground rules. The causes of obscurity and unique difficulties of learners around the world have been put on the back burner. Bombarded with the view that success is measured by the interaction and engagement itself, many educators and learners around the world easily disregard the most basic English ground rules in the meantime. Creativity lies in the concrete understanding of the basic English rules, and the basic English rules can fully be acquired when learners are able to relate the English rules to their existing cognitive structure, native language. Myth number 4. A process of language learning is inexplicable and cannot be easily observed. The second language process seems undoubtedly inexplicable, since most educators are not concerned with the non-existent concepts between English and their learners' native languages. English educators still continue to make the learning process more confusing with their vague approaches and theories. Getting bogged down in the complex and ambiguous nature of the language learning process, many educators and learners around the world are trapped in this vicious cycle of these misconceptions. Leonardo da Vinci says, "Nothing can be either loved or hated unless it is first known." You cannot learn something if you don't know it exists in the first place. I'm going to break down the intricate language learning process, which has long been considered as invisible and inexplicable, from the very beginning at the most basic level. Let's look at the English language from a different perspective. I'm going to focus on the non-existent concepts within my native language, Korean, in relation to the English phonetic system, grammar, and word arrangements and their meanings. Obscurity emerges between two languages when the form and its intended meanings in the target language don't exist in a learner's language. For instance, in these two English sentences, Tom is bored and Tom is boring convey very different meanings. However, whether a Korean speaker intends to express that Tom feels bored or Tom makes another person feel bored, only a single and identical intransitive verb is used undifferentiated in the Korean language. In English, the distinction in the grammatical form, that is the concept of present and past participle, in the English language directly represents its meaning. Nevertheless, they are non-existent and undifferentiated concepts in Korean. There is absolutely no concept of present and past participle in Korean. This non-existent and undifferentiated concept and its meaning remains unknown to most of Korean learners. Did you also know that there are only about 23 postpositions and particles combined in the Korean language? In the English language, there are 150 prepositions and adverbs combined. For example, these three basic English prepositions, at, in, and on, have very specific functions and distinctions depending on time, location, direction, and so on, as in at night, in the dark, on the radio. Nevertheless, in Korean, the prepositions at, in, and on are undifferentiated. Only a single Korean postposition, 에에서, is replaced regardless of the different functions. What's even more perplexing is that expressions such as at best, break out in a cold sweat, on the mend, do not involve any postposition when translated into Korean, causing the most extreme grammatical and semantic obscurity. This English word straight is one syllable word because of the single long vowel A sound, A, with the stress in the very beginning of the word. Korean is a syllable-based language, which means the initial consonant blend like straw and the ending consonant ta don't independently exist phonetically. They need additional vowel sounds for each of the consonants. Korean speakers read the word straight as s, t, re, i, t, with 5 syllables. 5 completely different vowel sounds such as u, e, i, u. There's no stress placed on any of the syllables because the Korean language has no concept of word stress. The long English vowel A sound alone is 2 separate vowels, e and I, in Korean. Korean speakers recognize these one-syllable English words as 소스, 트렁크, 스카우트. And the way native speakers normally say these words baffle most of them. Both educators and learners entirely overlook the fact that the Korean and English language have entirely different sets of vowel sounds, which also shape the concept of syllable. It's entirely irrational to encourage students to acquire something that doesn't exist naturally and spontaneously, without developing acute awareness and clarifying the sources of obscurity. The greater the causes of obscurity that exist between a learner's native language and English. Educators need to provide more suitable instructions to meet the unique needs of learners. Asian learners need a more precise approach that acutely zeroes in on the sources of obscurity between English and their native languages in order to successfully overcome the non existent concepts and therefore develop creativity. The basic English rules and acute awareness of the non existent concepts within a learner's native language are the missing piece of the second language acquisition process. At present, this missing piece is too often absent at the most basic level, regardless of learners' ages, education, and proficiency levels. According to Google search, there are 6,909 spoken languages in the world. Only 230 are spoken in Europe, while 2,197 are spoken in Asia. In relating to the structure of English language and its basic ground rules, what's actually calling the shots is the sources of obscurity, namely the varied, non existent, and undifferentiated concepts from the rest of the 6,908 learners' native languages around the world. However, learners around the world are lumped together as undifferentiated, including Asian learners who make up 1/3 of the world's populations. This oversimplistic and one-sided approach has been accepted as a norm without the acute awareness of the so-called inhibiting effects of a learner's native language. It's the one-size-fits-all approach that has made educators ineffective for too long, unable to identify the sources of linguistic ambiguity and complexity that led their learners astray. The whole point of machine learning is to avoid thinking at such a coarse level and human limitations. Taking into account 2 generations of empirical study and field work on diverse Asian learners, I invented simple learning algorithms of the basic English rules with a machine learning approach. My learning algorithm design is based on a schematization of the English basic rules of its phonology, grammar, and word arrangements. This algorithm design clearly defines the crucial components of the English language that have remained unidentified by educators and learners. This missing piece provides the essential guiding principle by comparing the basic structures of English to a learner's native language. In relating to the structures that define the English language, learners are able to systematically attain creativity and achieve basic English communicative skills by developing acute awareness of the non-existent concepts within their native language. Let me briefly explain my sentence converting algorithms. Compared to the 16 different English tenses, the Korean language can fully operate with only about 9 tenses due to a much broader tense usage. This algorithm design is only centered on the 4 basic English tenses: simple past, I did; past progressive, I was doing; simple present, I do; present progressive tense, I'm doing. It is intended to make a clear distinction between simple present and present progressive tense. That is undifferentiated in Korean. In my experience, almost every single Korean speaker, including university students and their educators, has consistently failed to accurately use the English simple present and present progressive tense. It's also important to acknowledge that the English linking verbs am, are, and is are replaced with one single verb. And there is no concept of a third singular form, such as does, in the present simple tense. A set of 19 designated English sentences provides the essential grammatical framework, and this sentence converting algorithm is also structured around the 4 elements of English sentences. Number 1, 7 different subjective pronouns. Number 2, verbs. Number 3, 4 tenses. And number 4, 4 types of sentences. As mentioned earlier, with a clear understanding of the distinction between a present and past participle, boring and bored, a learner can make a minimum of 56 different sentences by applying the 4 elements: subjective pronouns, types of verbs, tenses, and types of sentences, to the linking verb algorithm. For instance, the second sentence, I'm tired, from the 19 designated sentences, I included about 50 different adjectives and 5 different adverbs in the algorithm. This sentence, why aren't they quite satisfied with the results, is considered to be the same sentences as Tom is bored and boring, and I'm tired in the frame of the 19 designated sentences. Using the action verb algorithm, learners instantly create one English sentence into a minimum of 118 sentences and a minimum of 17,000 more sentences by replacing 144 different action verbs. It ensures learners to acquire the concept of undifferentiated tenses and their meanings. With acute awareness of the obscurities, learners attain creativity by connecting the forms and their meanings between the 2 fundamentally different structures of languages. These sentence converting algorithms were a major breakthrough, especially amongst a group of Korean elementary school students whose English communicative skills surpassed average college students not only in my fieldwork, but also during an oral proficiency interview test, OPIC, developed by American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages. The author of Master Algorithm book argues that control of data and ownership of the models learned from it is what many of the 21st century's battles will be about. The author goes on to say that all we need to do is provide the right kind of data and discovering the deepest regularities. My learning algorithm design provides an example of how to resolve the causes of intricacy and obscurity during the second language learning process using Korean language learners' experiences. They have already given new insight into individual Korean learners' levels of understanding and their performance, as well as statistical regularities in data extracted from Korean learners as a group. It offers an archetype model, and they are intended to be applied to a wide range of learners around the world. This learning algorithm design provides the best model that uniquely creates awareness and unequivocally identifies the varied non-existent concepts of languages around the entire world. It enables learners to overcome their distinct challenges with its scientific solutions. Sharing the data of varied obscurities drawn from learners on a global scale will spark new directions in research and development and transform the process of second language acquisition down the line. It is my dream that my learning algorithm design will galvanize educators, scientists, non-native workforce, and learners around the world to take prompt action and adjust their approach to the second language education. Join me in this effort to push for change and spread public awareness.